like to call to order the regular board meeting of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. You have before you an agenda. Mr. Berry, we have a couple of items to amend here.
Yes, Mr. Chair, 2 changes to your agenda with your approval. The addition of new business 1, that would be entitled 2019 Budget Meeting, and the deletion of CR2. We had listed that recommendations from the Corporate Services Committee meeting that was held earlier today. No recommendations came forward. So
The agenda's been moved as amended. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed, none opposed, the motion carries. Minutes of our meeting held November 28th. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Stone. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed, none opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Berry, no business arising from the minutes. To public input period, please. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to provide input to the board today? Welcome.
Okay, I'm here to help my friend because she doesn't speak English, and myself, my English is okay, not very good, so I hope you guys can understand me. Yeah. Okay, so she bought this property, and original, of course, she wants that beach house was so attractive. I went there too, and very nice. Had a lot of dreams, want to maybe make it better, but now the decision is cannot keep that house, needs to be demolished, and because she doesn't really speak English, so it's really hard for her to find someone to do this job, and so she asked me to help her. Then we did talk to first. Found a company to do this job, but that company said he needs like a report about the materials, if it's poisonous or not. So then he recommended, took a while, and for somebody to do that report to check, and now the report came out about 2-something weeks or 3 weeks, I cannot remember, ago. Then now we tried to contact the person to do this job and cannot get hold of him. I left the messages on my own phone number because she's not always here with me. And so even today, we phoned a few times, still no answer, and just cannot get hold of him. So my friend, she asked if she could have more time, then needs to look for and find another company to do this job. So for sure she's going to do it, but just need time.
Thank you very much for your input.
Yeah.
This is input, not we don't answer questions at this time, but we've heard your input and appreciate you coming and acting on behalf of your friend.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Would anyone else like to provide input to the committee today, or to the board today? Seeing none, move to the next item on the agenda. Would be report of the chairperson. I have just a very little bit to report to the board. Very briefly, a number of the members, board members and myself were invited to a meeting on Monday at in Victoria. It was hosted by the Ministry of Transportation, and the subject matter was the Island Corridor Foundation. As I said, we were invited to the meeting. It was hosted by the ministry. We anticipate there will be some further announcements coming forward, but just to let the board know that that we were well represented. We had not only the members of we had Mayor Staples, Mayor Sebring, Mayor Stone, and myself, Chief Seymour, and Vice Chair Acton, and we attended this. Number of thoughts and ideas were shared, but at this point, everybody is waiting the provincial government to come out with their assessment and direction as to where we go from there. So wanted to share that with everyone, and also wanted to inform the board that last week, I believe, we gathered the chairs and vice chair, and Mr. Barry led us through some training on effective running of meetings and the Robert's Rules of Order. We actually took a typical agenda and ran through, and just to ensure that all of your committee chairs and myself and we're working from the same sort of set of instructions, and I found it to be very very productive and very informative, and I won't speak for the others, but seemed like it was a worthwhile event, and the next step will be to provide an opportunity for vice chairs, and Director McGonigal wasn't able to attend, and any of the chairs that had attended this first training session to actually gather again and to go through much the same process, so that when vice chairs are thrust into the position of chairing a meeting, that they will have had some of the benefit of Mr. Barry's experience and instruction, so that we're doing a good job and consistent in the conducting of the people's business. So with that, on to the next item, information we have from the Vancouver Island Coastal Communities, and I believe that Director Acton wanted to speak to this. Did you, Director
Sure,
Acton?
thank you. Well, I was the one, it came in our information package, and I was the one who asked for the resolution section to come forward, and everybody thought I wanted to run on, you know what, I don't. But what I was thinking more of resolutions that were electoral area services related, so. I think it's gonna come up again next week in our electoral area services. Thank you.
It's anticipated the Electoral Area Services Committee and directors will be considering electoral area specific items to move forward to AVICC for their resolutions package, but I think it's more than appropriate that as a board that we start turning our minds to the type of resolutions that we would like to have considered that are important to us on a regional basis as well. So I believe, do we have the deadline for resolutions handy? February 7th. So I would ask that that the board members turn their minds to this while you've got all that free time and while you're reading the budget over Christmas holidays, that you think about pressing issues, and we'll perhaps discuss spending some time and discussing what are priorities that we'd like to see brought forward at the at AVICC this spring. Fair enough? Excellent. Number 9, committee commission reports. Mr. Barry?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The report and recommendations of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting that was held on December the 5th, and that would be Director Yanni Denaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Electoral Area Services Committee report of the meeting held December 5th is 1, the report be prepared on a feasibility of a full Satlam Fire Hall condition and cost assessment with options for renovation replacement with the supplemental request for the 2019 budget, and inclusion in the division department work plan. 2, that the CVRD support and explore opportunities with the province to designate provincial crown parcel. Oh, sorry. Provincial crown parcel lot 228 in electoral area B, Shawnigan Lake as park as per Cowichan Valley Regional District Settlement Plan bylaw number 512, area B. Number 3, that a 5-year renewable park permit be approved for the Cowichan Bay Estuary Center for the installation and management of the Heron Viewing Camera pole and supportive infrastructure in Wessex Ravine Community Park in Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay. That was 1 through 3.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Before we move forward, Mr. Carruthers on number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to provide clarity on item number 1 with respect to the outcome. Your supplemental requests were received today. They're part of your budget package. So technically, if this report comes forward and the board so chooses to consider this request, it would go forward as an addition to the budget. So I just wanted to be clear that this wouldn't be a supplemental request. The supplemental requests have already been received by the board. It would be the board's direction to add this particular item to the budget if they so chose.
Any further discussion? Nope.
We're leaving it in?
Director Acton?
Is that going to happen automatically for Director Nicholson, or?
Mr. Carruthers?
So the report that's been requested will be received in January from staff. And if the board considers the request and chooses to add it to the budget, it will become an addition to the budget for consideration by the board. It won't be automatic. It'll be up to the board to decide if they want to move that forward.
Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? See none opposed? Those carry. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Electoral area directors only, vote on the following. 4, the application number ALR 18A01, Wilkinson Road for expansion of a skateboard park at the 2860 Wilkinson Road be forwarded to the Agricultural Lands Commission with recommendation for approval. Number 5, 1, the application, the Ida Avenue be approved, and 2, that the General Manager of Land Use Services be authorized to permit minor revisions to the permit in accordance with the intent of the development permit guidelines of the official community plan bylaw number 3510. Number 6, that the amendment bylaw for number 01F15RS be forwarded to the board for consideration of first and second readings, and that 2, the referrals go to the Agricultural Land Commission, BC Transit, Cowichan Tribes, Island Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure be accepted. 3, the covenants be drafted prior to public hearing to secure the areas to be dedicated to the CVRD. And 4, that the public hearing be scheduled with the directors of electoral areas E, F, G, and I as delegates. That is.
You moving those? Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Savin. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Electoral area directors only. All those in favor? Those opposed?
That is my report, Mr. Chair.
That motion carries. Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Next to number 11, staff reports. We have 4564 Lanes Road, subject of the one of the delegation's comments.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the staff report from the Inspection and Enforcement Division, there is a recommendation that a demolition order be issued for the removal of the beach cabin and remediation of the site at 4564 Lanes Road as outlined in Attachment D of the Chief Building Plumbing Inspector Bylaw Enforcement Officer's October 23rd, 2018 staff report.
Turn to the board. Director Yanni DiNardo.
I'd like to move the recommendation, but I'd also see that if there was an added, seeing that there is some issues, if there's some extra time.
Well, if you're moving it, let's see if we have a seconder. It has been seconded. Would you like to speak to it, Director Yanni DiNardo?
No, that's fine. Speaking to the extra time, I think that, or speaking to the resolution itself.
I think maybe we should have Mr. Blackwell chime in here. Can you give us some ideas to timelines if this resolution were to pass as is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my recommendation would be to adopt or to pass the motion if that is the will of the board. And if the board also would like staff to have a conversation with the property owner to see if within a reasonable period of time, and I would just put it out there as a reasonable period of time rather than specifying a specific number of days, as direction, staff would take that and try to resolve it on that basis.
Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just also emphasize a reasonable time, because it's been a long time that it has sat like that, too. So it's, thank you.
Well, just before I go to the speakers list, so we've got a motion that's been duly moved and seconded. I think staff have heard the request for a reasonable amount of time. So with that, I had Directors Sebring, and who else would like to? Marsh, Acton, let's go with those first. Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the intent behind a reasonable amount of time, but what's reasonable to one person might not be reasonable to another. I would prefer that we set a firm deadline and say January 31st or something like that, because, as I said, we're putting staff in the position where what they determine may be reasonable. We have the owner come back and go, well, I tried, and now this other demolition company didn't work, and please give me another extension and be reasonable. I'd like to, it would be my preference to nail this down with a date, with all due respect to staff. I just think it puts them in less of a potentially uncomfortable position.
Thank you, Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if there's any signage on the building warning of the danger, or is that something that we don't do?
Mr. Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, no, there is no signage on the building.
Thank you.
I'm
Do you have a
wonder-
follow-up?
Yeah, I do. I'm wondering if that would make us less liable if we give a reasonable length of time, whatever that is?
Mr. Blackwell?
Thank you. CVRD will not be liable for any injury or any issue that results from access to this structure. That is borne solely by the property owner. The staff have been following the direction of legal counsel, which has led us to this situation today over the best part of 2 years. These things are difficult, and this is why I've suggested that having a bit of an open-ended period of time associated with this would provide a little bit more flexibility, because things like the availability of a company to undertake this work may compromise timelines and so forth. So further to what I said earlier, the benefit of being a bit more vague is we could plug that condition into the existing stream of by law enforcement in relation to those timelines that have been relied on to this point. I don't know if that makes sense.
Thank you. I'd just like to remind the board, we've got a motion that's been duly moved and seconded. Staff have taken direction from us, and I think clearly understand the intent of the committee. Director Acton, are your comments in regards to the resolution? Go ahead.
Well, the timeline resolution, so.
There's no resolution, the resolution on
Well-
the floor is what's contained here. We've just given direction to staff. We haven't got a
it's-
motion on timelines, dates, anything like that.
It's on the direction.
Fair enough, go ahead.
Well, I agree that it's kind of ambiguous, and that, with this, how it is now, there's technically 30 days. And these people are, to me, are obviously trying to work with us, that to me, it would be best practice to either make it 60 days or 90 days. We're coming up to the holidays. It's hard to get people to do, labor. Well,
Mr.
it looks challenging to me to not change it.
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a person that's been dealing with this one personally for quite some time, I'm quite happy to be just a reasonable amount of time. They have been working with me, and I think it could resolve itself with, quote unquote, a reasonable amount of time as opposed to a hard deadline. So that's just my comment to alleviate any concerns that some may have. Thank you.
Director Staples.
So does the motion need to be amended then? No? Okay.
No, my understanding is what we have here is perfectly reasonable, and the staff are prepared to work with that, and no subsequent motion is required after the fact. So seeing no other hands in the air, I'm going to call the question on the resolution. All those in favor? And those opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. SR2, Mr. Barry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, we do this every year. After the chair creates the standing committees, we need to set the calendar for the year. This is the backbone for the meeting structure for the CVRD because all other meetings fit into it. So in front of you is the 2019 Board and Standing Committee regular meeting calendar. And I have two recommendations. One, that the calendar be approved. And the second one is our bylaw states that the regular meetings of the board shall be held on the second and fourth Wednesdays. And in September, UBCM, that's when their conference is, their convention. So we need a resolution in advance to cancel that. So the part two would be that the September 25th, 2019 regular board meeting be canceled due to the Union of BC, the UBCM convention being held at that time.
Moved and seconded. Director Marsh, can you turn your mic off? And someone had brought up earlier today a conflict with another event.
Yeah, but that was a budget thing, that doesn't go to this, I don't
Yeah,
think.
but I think it was also board that day too. So it's been moved and seconded what we've got before us, but
The 16th. No.
are people furiously looking at their calendars? Good, because I'm not.
14th,
Is it Wednesday, the 14th?
yes.
Mr. Barry.
So, Mr. Chair, yes, in February, our bylaw requires us to have a regular board meeting on Wednesday, February the 13th. You can cancel that now, and we can add to the resolution. Well, actually, I'd do it as number 3. In front of you right now is number 1 and 2. Why don't we do that right now, and then do the next one?
Everyone clear? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Not opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Barry, at number 3.
Yes, so in number 3, I'm hearing that there's going to be a conflict on February the 13th. So a resolution that the February 13th, 2019 regular board meeting be canceled. And, as I'm hearing from the far side over there, and the February 13th corporate services meeting. Due to LGLA.
Moved by Director Staples, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? I think I'm going to wait for a minute and let,
Weekend. You're okay?
everybody's good with that? We're all clear on the resolution? I won't get Mr. Barry to read it out again, but it's basically canceling that date.
Yes,
those
Mr.
two
Chair,
meetings.
that's canceling for those two meetings, the board meeting on February the 13th and the Corporate Services Committee on February the 13th.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? I see none opposed. That motion carries.
And Mr. Chair, just because Director Acton, okay, it's been resolved.
Excellent.
Staff report number 3 from the Environmental Services Division regarding the Cowichan Watershed Society funding agreement, and the recommendation that the 2018 funding agreement with the Cowichan Watershed Society to contribute to core operational costs as attached to the Environmental Services Manager's December 3rd, 2018 staff report be approved.
Moved by Director Staples, seconded by Director Marcotte. Any discussion? Director Kuhn.
I had a look at the agreement, and it runs out at the end of December 2018. So the funding that's provided now, is it for, in retrospect, for 18 or is it for 19?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is for the 2018 budget year, so this is for the expenditure that was budgeted for in 2018.
Yes, this is really housekeeping to fulfill agreements and expenditures already that have taken place. So I look around the room, I see no other hand. Director Marsh?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this was the total amount of the contribution to this?
Yes.
Is there a reason they get it at the end of the year rather than at the beginning of the year?
Mr. Carruthers?
Yeah, they've been working on the agreement over the last number of months. We traditionally will pay it partway through the year, and they cover their funds. And this is, as the chair said, this is a housekeeping issue to bring the agreement forward to the board for execution.
Okay.
Seeing no other hands,
So
I'll
next year they may get it sooner. Is that right?
subject to budget discussions and approvals. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? I see none opposed, the motion carries. Mr. Barry?
Yes, Mr. Chair, staff report number 4 from the Finance Division regarding the temporary borrowing bylaw number 4252. It's just in front of you for information. This explains why the bylaw is on the agenda later and why it's needed.
Fairly self-explanatory, thank you. Any questions? None. SR 5?
And essentially the same thing for SR 5, the staff report Finance Division regarding revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw number 4253, which is on the agenda later this evening, and this explains the reasons why.
Excellent. Any questions for this item? Seeing none. No public hearings. 13 bylaws. Mr. Barry.
First bylaw 4209, Burnham Water System Service Amendment, a requisition limit increase, $59,000, be adopted.
Moved by Director Acton, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries. B2.
B2, bylaw 4242, Lambourne Estates Water System Service Amendment, requisition limit. There's actually a typo in your cover sheets. The bylaw is correct, but the type, it's actually $51,500, be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Bylaw 4243, Mill Spring Sewer System Service Amendment, requisition limit increase, $137,000, be adopted.
Moved by Director Salmon, seconded by Director Kuhn. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries.
Bylaw 4244, Lambourne Estates Sewer System Service Amendment, requisition limit increase, $39,000, be adopted.
Moved by Director Yanni DiNardo, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
Bylaw 4252, Arbutus Mountain Sewer Temporary Borrowing Bylaw, first 3 readings.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed? None opposed. The motion carries.
And bylaw 4252 for adoption.
Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, those opposed, none opposed, the motion carries.
Bylaw 4253, Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw, first 3 readings.
Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Marsh. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor and those opposed, the motion carries.
And bylaw 4253 for adoption.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Sebring. Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor, those opposed, none opposed, the motion carries.
And Mr. Chair, that's it for the bylaws this evening.
Move to number 16. You've all had a item unfinished business, and you've had an item distributed to you in advance. I've discussed this with members. There's a slight change. Thank you to Mr. Barry for putting it in this format that we've used in previous circumstances. And provided everyone is satisfied with this committee, we can move them all as a block or do them one at a time. What's your pleasure? Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Staples. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Barry?
Mr. Chair, just for those people who are watching streaming, I'll read the recommendation.
What an excellent idea.
So the public knows what we're voting on. 5 parts, that a Director Services Select Committee be established to consider directors' compensation and expenses, benefits, training and development, and a code of conduct. 2, that Directors Acton, Yoni DiNardo, Marsh, McGonigal, Morrison, Nicholson, and Stone be appointed to the Director Services Select Committee. Number 3, that Director Acton be appointed Chair of the Director Services Select Committee. Number 4, that Director McGonigal be appointed Vice Chair of the Director Services Select Committee. And number 5, that the Director Services Select Committee report back to the Board with a final report and recommendations by June 2019.
Looking around the room, seeing no hands up, I will call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed? The motion carries. Next item, new business, NB1. I can't read my own writing. Mr. Barry.
NB1 2019 budget meeting.
Oh, that's it. Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier today in your Corporate Services Committee meeting, you had an item to consider dates for your 2019 budget meetings. Conflict was identified with one of our participants. It was referred back to staff to consider alternatives, and during the break between Corporate Services and Board, we were able to consult with staff, and although not optimal in terms of timing, we believe that after the last of the committee meetings, we could reasonably have our budget meetings on January the 31st and February 1st, so that would be a Thursday, Friday. And if that meets the needs of the board, we will schedule those dates as alternative to February 7th and 8th.
Do we need anything in particular for that, Mr. Barry?
Yes, Mr. Chair, a resolution that special Corporate Services Committee meetings be scheduled from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. on January 31st and February 1st to review the 2019 budget.
Moved by Director McGonigal, seconded by Director Acton. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? None opposed? That motion carries. To question period. And I have a reporting back duty that I promised at the last board meeting, and to Mr. Evans. There is currently no work in progress and no work being planned currently for the amalgamation, right-sizing, incorporation of the Shawnigan Lake zoning bylaw into the area, or the South Cowichan zoning bylaw. There is anticipation that that will be addressed under the modernization and, what's the other word? Harmonization of the zoning and official community plans. So I promised I'd get back to you with that, and that's your answer. Does anyone have any questions for me today?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Cliff Evans from Shawnigan Lake. On SR5, it's really neat that we can save $26,000 by borrowing from our own reserve funds. Is that limited to just one fund, or is there other ways that we can apply this to? Because this sounds like a pretty good savings.
Mr. Evans, I will have an appropriate staff person get back to you and give you more specifics around that. I don't obviously have that at my fingertips, and we are going to be implementing a new policy in the new year when questions are asked that can't be answered by the chair, that a individual will be assigned someone to get back to you with that answer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Are there any other questions from the gallery? Seeing none, how about a resolution to go into closed session? Mr. Barry, under?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we need to close this meeting to the public for 2 items, actually 3, the closed session minutes of November 28th, appointments to the Thetis Island Port Commission, and appointments to the Cowichan Lake Recreation Commission.
Do we have a mover? Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Kuhn. All those in favor? Those opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Take 5 minutes.